Welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Albert Cho. Recently, China held the Peace Unity 2024 military exercise within Tanzania and Mozambique, highlighting its ties to Africa. Meanwhile, the U.S. announced the withdrawal of its last troops from Niger, signaling that years of American investment in Africa have produced few results. U.S. and Chinese influence in Africa has been shifting. How will this situation evolve in the future? Joining us today are Liou To-hai, National Chengchi University, Diplomacy and Ecology of International Affairs Adjunct Professor, and Su Yanbin, National Chengchi University, Department of Political Science Professor. A very warm welcome to both on the show. According to reports by Russia's Sputnik, Africans continue to suffer from terrorism, with over 4,000 deaths due to terrorist attacks in Mozambique alone. The primary aim of the Peace Unity 2024 joint military exercise is to enhance counterterrorism cooperation and contribute to the stability and security of East Africa. The opening ceremony of this joint exercise was held at Tanzania's Comprehensive Training Center, which was built with Chinese aid. The PLA, on the other hand, has also deployed ground forces and the naval fleets to participate. So my first question goes to Professor Liu. How do we interpret this level of the Chinese involvement in this region?
Obviously, China has taken advantage of what you just mentioned about the U.S. Influence declining. And actually, Russia's influence is also declining in some way. So that is why it's a good chance for China to upgrade its collaboration with African countries. If we look at China's Africa policy, there's three stages can be identified. The first stage, back to the mid-1950s, China talking about the intermediate zone and later the third world. That includes Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So China has always paid attention to Africa, never changed. Then the second stage is about China opened the door to the world in the late 1970s. In that case, China started to focus economic interest in Africa, and then further enhanced in the post-Cold War era. So now U.S. influence is declining. That's provided China Africa a greater chance to expand its influence in Africa. So that's why, from ideological interest to economic interest, now it's already greatly upgraded to the security interest. Because Tanzania and Mozambique are to the east. That means Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. So also close to Tanzania, that's the Somalia. So at this time, the military drill has been upgraded to 3 countries together. In addition, Chinese naval forces as well as army jointly participate in this operation. So this is the first time Chinese armed forces and naval forces together join this kind of operation. So that means that in the future, they will further enhance this kind of security operation, targeting at counter-terrorism and the counter-piracy.
Professor Su, even though this joint exercise is in the name of counter-terrorism, but we know probably the story is not that simple, because every time when there is a military joint exercise in Asia, in Southeast Asia, most likely led by the United States, people would always argue that the target is PLA and even CCP. So what about, on the other hand, in Africa? Professor just mentioned that it's for counterterrorism. Do you think so, or do you think that's counter-America?
Well, indeed, this military exercise, on the surface, aims to promote counterterrorism and counter-piracy capabilities, and but in reality, the importance of this kind of military exercise is twofold. First, in my opinion, I think this kind of military exercise aims to protect Chinese interests or economic interests in Africa. In particular, Tanzania and Mozambique ranked 12th and 15th in terms among these 54 African countries in terms of China's FDI. So, using this kind of military drill could be very important for China to show its capability to protect its economic interests. And the second goal is to strengthen China's capabilities or experiences for overseas military exercises. So as we know that most of China's overseas military exercises are in the region of Asia. Therefore, conducting military exercises in other regions like Africa help China to portray itself to be a global power in the long run.
We see that Tanzania and Mozambique are both adjacent to the Indian Ocean, as Professor mentioned, and connected to China's Maritime Silk Road. Now let's focus on this Silk Road. What common interests do the three countries share? What benefits does China have in stabilizing the East African coast? Professor Liu.
The first and the most, of course, is economic interest. Why is that so? Because East Africa, all Africa is rich in mineral resources, in particular critical minerals such as cobalt, lithium, manganese, nickel, as well as the graphite. They are all available in Tanzania, Zambia, as well as the Madagascar and those countries. So both Tanzania and Mozambique have this kind of critical minerals. They are key components for manufacturing electric vehicle batteries. So that is why Bloomberg already mentioned about the Zambia is a very good place because it's possesses the copper belt. So that is why China is talking about to invest $1 billion to refurnish the previous built Tanzania railway. So it can connect the Zambia's copper belt to Tanzania's port of Dar es Salaam. So in that case, they connect to China's One Belt, One Road initiative.
Professor Su, could those minerals be used for military developments or even more advanced technology in China? And that is why the CCP is concerned with those minerals so much in Africa.
Yeah, of course. It must have great potential for helping China to sort of advance its industrial level. And I agree with Professor Liu that stabilizing in this region of East Africa actually serve for China's economic interests. Well, we know that in 2018, both countries, Tanzania and Mozambique, joined the Belt and Road Initiative in 2018. And so that means that both countries are willing to be integrated with China's grand global economic strategy plans. And on the other hand, both countries actually suffer a lot from the extremist groups that are linked to the Islamic terrorist group Al-Shabaab in East Africa. And Mozambique was suffered probably the second most suffered country in East Africa. Tanzania is suffered to some extent, but mostly in the region of the borderline with Mozambique. So basically, if both countries can find a way to sort of promote their capabilities for counterterrorism, I think this kind of stabilization of the domestic politics could actually help both these countries and China to promote more economic interest.
My next question has to do with the cultural the CCP used to treat those African countries. The joint exercise included various cultural elements, such as naval fleet deck reception hosted by China and the dispatch of the hospital ship Peace Ark. So how do both of you analyze the China-specific features of the military exercise, Professor Liu?
Yes, China perhaps one of the big powers who has maintained its influence in Africa in a consistent way. Why I said so? Because in the past, AIDS was rampant in Africa. Lots of people left. Western did not come, and a few of them arrived there. But Chinese stay there. And then COVID-19 again, they stay there. So that is why medical assistance is a very important part when it comes to China's policy toward Africa. This is very important to maintain the long-term friendship.
Right. Yeah.
And also, of course, you already mentioned about China has tried not to involve their domestic politics to be shrewd. In that case, no matter which side wins, China can always stay there. So this is very important for Chinese. Now they are talking about the commercial activities there. So China even helped them to build this kind of cross-border e-commerce. So we already mentioned about those EV factory and EV batteries are going to be built by Chinese soon. So then they can taking advantage of the locally built EV, 1 wheel to 3 wheels, even 4 wheels, and then use them to promote the Chinese cross-border e-commerce in Africa. So this is a Chinese way. It is chimichanga, American way is chimichanga. Lots of things there. Of course, it has its own priority.
Right, Professor Su, if the Chinese way is as a friendly way to Africa and try not to judge them, instead they just be in company with them, would you say that the United States has been somewhat off the track in terms of treating those African countries and therefore are less likely to win their hearts?
Well, definitely. Well, if we go back to Trump's administration from 2016 to 2020, from that time until now, we see very little signs that the U.S. government try very hard to enhance the involvement in the African affairs, on contrast, China has done a lot of efforts has made a lot of efforts to exert its influence both in terms of hard power and soft power in Africa. So I think in terms of the cultural elements, as you've just mentioned in this military exercise, I think it is very smart strategy because many African countries used to have a brutal colonial history in the past. And so, for example, Tanzania has been colonized by Germany, and Great Britain and Mozambique had been colonized by Portugal. So China knows pretty well that to reduce the potential negative impacts brought by its military presence, it is very important for China to exert a more soft power to its African friends.
Mm-hmm. Now those relations probably materialized. It's worthwhile to mention that the Chinese Foreign Affairs Ministry has announced that the Forum on China-African Cooperation, so-called FOCAC, will take place in Beijing in September, marking the first meeting between Chinese and African leaders in 6 years. Given the decline, Western influence in Africa, and the uncertainty surrounding the United States presidential election, so probably the United States would need to push harder in this regard. On August 6th, the U.S. Department of Defense announced that the U.S. military forces have withdrawn from its last base in Niger. We are talking about Niger. The external view is that the U.S. has suffered a significant loss, with years of investment in manpower and resources, such as over 100 million spent on constructing the Niger Air Base 201 in central Niger. So, Professor Liu, what is could you explain what Niger is so important? What is the symbolic significance of the U.S. military departure from Niger?
Niger is very important because it's in the middle of the Africa. So in that case, that is a very important military collaboration between the United States and France together against terrorists, because lots of the radical, terrorists have emerged in Africa because so many young people, so they can easily turn them to the radical terrorists. So that is why it's very important. U.S. wants to nip the bud before they attack the United States. So that is why this has been very important. And U.S. also set up the UAV hub. That means unmanned aerial, drone to make sure everything is all right and help to maintain the peace, not only United States but Europe, both this kind of possible terrorist attack from Africa. So now U.S. has been forced to leave Niger. In that case, now U.S. is thinking about to go to the Ivory Coast or other places friendly to the United States. So U.S. is not going to completely withdraw from the Africa, but perhaps shift to other countries. Of course, Niger's place is very important.
Well, you mentioned that it's not a complete withdrawal. However, it's still withdrawal. So, Professor Su, so Professor Liu mentioned the importance of contain this anti-American sentiments force in those regions, in case for the future revenge against the United States. But is that policy successful? You think anything that we can pick up on that?
Well, my point is that after the U.S. withdrew its military base from Niger, the presence of U.S. military is becoming much weaker. According to the public information, among these 6 regional U.S. combatant commands around the globe, the U.S. Africa Command is the second smallest command in terms of the size of personnel. So after the U.S. withdrew its military base from Niger, the U.S. military presence becomes much more weaker, and it certainly might provide more opportunity for Russia and China to fill in the vacuum.
In addition to the U.S., France has also withdrawn its troops from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. We see Western countries losing ground in Africa, while Russia is capitalizing on the situation. According to Reuters, Russian troops have entered an Air Force base previously occupied by U.S. forces in the region. So I wonder, could both of you respectively analyze the expansion of the Chinese and Russian influence in Africa? Professor Liu?
I think they have different approaches. Like Russia, is quite similar to the United States, tend to focus on military build-up, military intervention, political involvement in local politics. On the other hand, Chinese have always been focusing on economic means. For example, providing the infrastructure project, big and other things. Chinese emphasize economic development. We help you to improve your economy, and nothing related to military and politics ideology. In that case, China has a better chance. So that is why U.S. is withdrawing from this region, and immediately it is Russia penetrated into Africa right away. For Chinese, now the most important is to consolidate its build-up in Africa, because now when we talk about EV, both the United States and the EU are imposing high tariffs on Chinese EVs. So China, for example, Chinese caution is already built up. It's going to build up the battery mega factory in Morocco, because Morocco has FTA with United States and EU. So in that case, that's China's base. And then Chinese also built up the factory EV factory in Nigeria. Nigeria is the the second largest economy in Africa, largest population in Africa. So that is why we talk about Zambia, or is very likely to be the next Chinese EV battery base.
Even though you mentioned that the economic concern is CCP's primary concern, but we can also argue that security issue is also a priority for CCP. For example, the place called Djibouti, right? The Chinese, PLA, United States, even European countries, continue to build up military bases over there, even though buy it out or rent the place for their work. So tell us a little bit more about the security concern of the CCP in Africa, Professor.
Yeah, well, I agree with Professor Liu that for the most part, China pay more attention to its economic gains in Africa. And of course, it also tries to sort of gradually expand its military presence in Africa and as well as in other regions. And but in terms of the question that you just asked, Russia actually expanded its military cooperations with African countries by using its private security company, the Wagner, and also together with Russian mercenaries to protect African leaders to fight against the extremist groups. And it is certainly a risky but actually very profitable business for Russia. And we shall not forget that Africa, composed with 54 countries, is a big voting bloc in United Nations. So when it comes to UN General Assembly resolutions, both China and Russia, and of course other countries, must find a way to win the hearts from these African countries. And as we can observe, China and Russia has made great efforts to try to win their heart.
After the U.S. presidential election in November, if Trump is elected, of course, there's another likelihood will be Kamala Harris. Will Trump specifically take any action against the growing Chinese and Russian influence in Africa? I know that there is not much talk in this regard in media, maybe not in Chinese media, where Trump seeks to reestablish U.S. influence in the region. Professor Su, you still go first.
Well, from his first term from between 2016 to 2020, we saw very little U.S. involvement in different regions in the world. So in this sense, we can say that Trump holds a kind of isolationist stance when engaging global affairs. So, compared to Latin America, for example, there are fewer U.S. allies in Africa, and Trump administration's actually distanced itself from Latin America in the first term. Even Latin America is so close geographically to the United States. So, and then in terms of the affairs in Europe, the NATO cooperation, etc., Trump administration paid very little attention to that matter. So even though Latin America and Europe is used to be very close to the United States, we see very little efforts made by Trump, let alone that Trump might pay much attention to Africa, for example. So I think in this sense, it is not very optimistic to expect that the U.S. will reestablish its influence in Africa.
Mm-hmm. So will this isolationist kind of attitudes or policy towards Africa will continue if Trump is elected, Professor Liu?
I think Trump has already witnessed what happened in the world. Now is the Biden administration actually has made enemy with both China and Russia. So in that case, I believe Donald Trump will try to split them. So the best possible way is to improve relations with Russia. Mm-hmm. He always mentioned about he has special relationship with Putin. Mm-hmm. And his focus is going to shift to Indo-Pacific rather than Africa. Africa has never been a major strategic focus of his administration in the past. Now, still not.
Yeah. What about if Kamala Harris is elected, what's likely her policy towards Africa? Your guess?
Even under Biden administration, Biden himself did not haven't been there, Africa. Yeah. Harris, Vice President, she has been there. Of course, she has the African descendant. So that is possible to improve. The thing is, Africa, they want economic assistance. Don't focus on too much about the values. But the liberals in the United States, they always mention about value. Harris perhaps even more pay attention to value. So in that case, that could be a stumbling block for her to improve relations with
Professor
Africa.
Su? Also agree with Professor Liu. Well, I think to probably the best scenario that Harris might, follow, if she would be elected, was following is to follow what Biden has done in Africa. So in my opinion, I don't think much will be changed in terms of the U.S.-Africa relationship.
Professor Su and Professor Liu, thank you for the great insights in the show. Africa is often neglected in Asia, but it is a strategically crucial continent. The CCP has been smart about helping African countries in its own way. However, Western diplomacy, whether from the United States or Europe, appears to be struggling to effectively engage with Africa. Like our show, subscribe to Taiwan Talks. See you soon.